Hello there, lovely listeners. You are back down the red rabbit hole. We have missed you so much. Because we missed you, we've got a lovely little surprise for you. Lisa has been out and about with her sack, haven't you, Lisa?
I have indeed. It's what I do with all my spare time now. I just wander around looking for authors.
Just shove into her sack and drag down the red rabbit hole. And do we have an author for you?
Do you know how I spot them?
Go on.
How I make sure I know they're always walking around with notepads or laptops,
Yeah,
just typing. Like that's how you know they're authors. They write all the time.
definitely. They also have a
Mm,
forlorn look if they're anything
mm.
like me.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, yeah.
The author that we've got for you today is the crime thriller author Anne Coates. And Anne has she's got a crime series that's set in the 1990s that we just discussed. Is this a period drama now? We don't know.
It would be.
Something to discuss later. And it's called the Hanaway Bridge crime series. So Anne, are you here?
I am here indeed, yes.
Are you well?
I'm very well, thank you.
You survived the sack.
I was just going to say, I'm very happy to be out of the sack.
It's not a pleasant
Sorry,
place.
it's a bit scratchy.
And a bit smelly, I think, now, because she doesn't wash it.
Let's see if I can get a little silk lining for the burlap.
Good idea.
So, Anne, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got writing.
Well, I've always worked in book publishing and journalism, so that's a good starting place. Although it's also a bit of a disadvantage in many ways, because people seem to think that you know more than you would do, and would be better, or whatever. So I worked in book publishing, then I moved into women's magazines, and I worked in fiction. Then I went freelance, and I've worked in all sorts of scenarios for different magazine, in-house magazines, newspapers, genre type magazines, so if it was parenting or something like that. And I also wrote or have written 7 non-fiction books. But all this time I was actually writing short stories, and it took ages before I got one published. I got one published, and then it was a huge length of time before I got another one published. And then I started writing for Bella when they were doing their sort of last page, which was like 1,000-word mystery stories, and that worked really well. And then I did the longer ones inside the magazine, but mine weren't really love stories. They were more sort of relationships, so it could be family relationships or friendships or something like that. And all this time, I would have liked to have written. And I did meet one literary agent at one time, and they said, write your first book, then put it in the drawer and forget about it. And then start with the second book, because you will have got rid of all the bits of personal information and biography that you want to put in the book. You'll have got rid of it. And that's what I did. And I have actually, I've still got it. You never know, I might rewrite it. And I looked at it, and I thought, oh my God. Recently I looked at it, I thought, good idea to put that one away.
So were they right? Was the reason to put it away because of the kind of biographical aspects to it?
I think because you do, and on it's like your first. Well, I suppose one almost could say do that with your children. Have a first time.
No,
mistakes. I am a first child. I hasten to.
I think a lot of it. I mean, I've heard first books referred to as apprenticeships before, so it's like you're learning your trade on the first book, and you make all your mistakes on the first book as well.
Yes, and one of the things is it's writing to a length as well. So I'd already done that with some of my non-fiction. So I knew I could write 60, 70, 80,000 words. That was after, except they came afterwards. Those books came afterwards. But obviously, non-fiction, you're using very different techniques and research.
What were the non-fiction books on?
So, my first one was, I wrote 2 initially for a publisher, and they were school books. And one was Women in History, and it was sport, about which I knew absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So that was pure research. But I was lucky, because people I knew sort of gave me intros to people who were past, because it was a history, you know, the England women's netball captain. And I got the photograph, you know, so that was really great to have something like that, because it was almost unique, you know, nobody else had featured this woman. And then I did a book called Teenage Pregnancy, and that was more about, you know, telling your mum and dad and telling your boyfriend and all sorts of things like that. And then I wrote a book called Your Only Child, and that was about only children, obviously. And I have an only child.
So that one could be a bit biographical then. You could kind of draw from your own experiences.
I was drawing, but I did a lot of research on that one. There were very few books on the subject at the time, and I also got interviewed loads and loads and loads of adults who were only children, and and young, you know, children who were sort of young teens, only children, to get, you know, complete sort of idea of it. Lots of only children, it seemed, like to have only children, which was interesting.
Ah.
And then I wrote 2 books about applying for university and surviving university.
They'd be very handy now. They must be bestsellers around this time of year. Each time.
They were, except applying, obviously, it changes. So, you know, I mean, I think it for 5 years, I had a different edition each year.
Yeah, and I think that's the case with some non-fiction stuff. As you point out, sometimes there's gaps, isn't there? Because nobody has written about this. No, and there are people out there who could really do with a guide or some help with that. And then the other thing is, you don't necessarily have to be the expert on the topic. And sometimes I think it's an advantage not to be the expert on the topic, because then you are able to make it translate and be understandable, particularly for books that, you know, for schools or for children or for particular people who actually the experts on the subject might talk in all their lingo and jargon and not make it accessible.
Yes, and an expert sort of may assume that you know certain things, which you don't, you know. So yes. So anyway, that I carried on with non-fiction. I mean, non-fiction was obviously, I was writing as a journalist as well, so that was obviously non-fiction as well. And as I was saying, I was carrying on writing. But then the sort of journalism, my first Hannah Weybridge book had its inception really from an interview that I did for a newspaper with a prostitute and a police sergeant at King's Cross. And it was to link in with I think it's a BBC documentary about clearing up King's Cross and prostitution there and that sort of thing. And I don't know if you want me to go on with this bit of it.
Oh, yes, please.
This is the rabbit hole that we're going down for these next couple of episodes, isn't
So
it?
I interviewed, and it was, you know, it was a huge job for me. I'd never been paid so much money in my life. And I met up, and I was old enough to be this girl's mother, and she was, I don't know, 17, 18, and she was so beautiful. And, you know, she looked like she'd just had a cup of cocoa last night and got up this morning and did yoga, you know, that morning and did. But obviously she'd had the most horrendous childhood, which ended up with her becoming a sex worker. And a bit later on, I was working with a photographer as well. And a bit later on, you know, she went off and made herself up for the photographer. Well, you wouldn't have recognised the young girl. She was photographed by obviously by the photographer. And he at the end said, "Oh, poor kid, you know, I gave her an extra tenner. You're using those photographs for something else." And so anyway, that was that. And then I interviewed this police officer who had been a school teacher actually, and had moved into becoming a policeman. And he sounded, so Butterwood, you know, he sounded so wonderful. You know, it was community, and he was so good and so kind. And you kept thinking, yeah, there's got to be a catch. There's got to be a catch somewhere, you know. But anyway, I wrote up the interview, and in the end, the newspaper didn't use it because they felt it was just too tragic, basically. And I mean, they paid me, but it was actually quite difficult. It was a difficult interview to do because I couldn't think of anything worse than what I was listening to, about what she'd been through. And it had started off almost predictably with a mother's partner abusing her, being pregnant, and and then going into care, and the care was almost worse than the abuse by her stepfather. Anyway, that was put aside, and what I had to do was I had to pay her in cash, and so the newspaper biked over a jiffy bag full of used readies, as it were, and I had to give it to her. And afterwards, I thought, you stupid idiot, Anne, you've given her the envelope it came in with my name and address on. And I thought, well, that was a bit of a stupid thing to do. You could be inviting all sorts of unwelcome attention with this. And anyway, nothing did happen, of course. But I was about 2:00 one morning. I must have fallen asleep in my baby's room, and there was a knock or a ring on the bell or something. And I went downstairs. Well, I looked out the window. I couldn't see anybody there at all. And I don't know, it was a fluke, whatever it was, nobody was there. But it made me think, what if, which is what loads of writers start off with their story, what if. So I started off with, what if that sex worker turned up on your doorstep?
Well, there's so much in that story of the kind of prejudice straight off the bat, just to come in with that very quickly. But like that, like you said about the photographer, what is he going to use those pictures for? And that it's all right, I bunged her an extra bit of cash, so it's okay for me to do whatever I want with these pictures now, which is absolutely disgusting. And then that hearing about her tragedy and the difficulties she'd experienced in her life was kind of deemed unpalatable for readers. Like, we can't have this idea of a sex worker. It's like they must, I don't know if it's because we need to kind of keep them in mind in a certain way, within the public consciousness. It's hard. I think they're victims more than anything else, but we don't like to see them that way. It is a crime. Prostitution is a crime. We want to see them as perpetrators, not as victims.
Yes, and often you see them actually on TV shows and that as depicted as sort of beautiful and living the high life because they're making so much money. And this was completely the reverse. And also, this girl sadly had a drug habit, so that's what she was funding. And she would not have been alive probably a year later.
Oh, goodness.
The girl I have in my book doesn't have the habit.
I mean, you must have gone through some very deep, dark rabbit holes for the kind of research. I mean, just for the article alone, you'd have been knee deep in it.
Yeah, before that, I'd written about prostitution for a women's magazine, and I'd done quite a lot of research. And then I interviewed somebody at the Collective of English Prostitutes. I think that was up at King's Cross as well. And they are very strict about who they let interview them. And I was trying to sort of play on the fact that, look, I'm a single mother as well. I'm not looking at this from any angle, blah, blah, blah. And when I got there, they said, oh, this is just to talk to you. We're not doing the interview now. This is just to see if we accept you. And I said, well, actually, I actually can't afford to come back in that sense. So in the end, they did agree to do the interview, and we both recorded it. And I said to them, you've got the recording and I've got the recording. What goes to press isn't necessarily what I have written. An editor may change something, but they were okay with that. So, but it was uncomfortable because I felt as if I was the enemy somehow, and I certainly didn't think or see myself as one.
Well, it's interesting. I had a little look into some of the stats around sex workers in the UK, and particularly women who are particularly at risk are those who are involved in street prostitution. So, if you are in a brothel or in some sort of kind of group or collective in some way, that's much more protective. So maybe it was that you were approaching a group, and actually, they were sort of trying to protect themselves a bit, because women in street prostitution in the UK are 12 times more likely to be murdered than women in the same age group in the UK. At least 137 women involved in prostitution have been murdered since 1999.
It's another thing that's coming up now, and they're trying to change the law so that it's actually the men who use the prostitutes who are charged rather than the prostitutes.
Can I do my last stat just to show you? So the murder rate for prostitutes is notably high, with 84% of known prostitutes murdered in the UK during the 1990s whilst working on the
No, that
streets.
can't be right. And
84%.
that's the thing, is there's going to be a lot of them they're not even going to have known about or even bothered to look into.
Yeah. Yeah, that's terrible. This is turning down to a very dark rabbit hole right now for us. Yeah, grim. It's grim.
In terms, I mean, this is just my personal opinion, but I've always felt, look, it's the oldest profession for a reason, and it is a profession at the end of the day. And why can't it just be legal and taxed and protected? And therefore, the supply and demand of trafficking in that then becomes much less, because people, women and men, can choose to be in this profession.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is much more prevalent now, of course, is women who have been enticed over here from other countries, and with the promise of jobs, then they lose their passports, etc., and they are put to work wherever, and they have the most horrendous
Yeah, I
life.
hadn't thought about that. Of course, the trafficked.
You know, the trafficked women, and of course there's nothing that they have no sort of paper trail really.
No, they're not in the statistics at the end of the day. And that's why I do think, personally, like I said, there are some places where it's legal in the world, but I think if they made it legal in the UK, then everyone's a winner. I don't get why they don't do it, to be honest. I mean, the police that are messing around with their time on it then can do more productive things. You've got taxes going into the government from the profession. You've got more safety for the women.
Yeah, we could put some protections in place.
It boggles the mind as to.
You can have a safeguarding pathway, couldn't you? Because quite often that is the case again within groups or within brothels. They'll sort of talk to each other and know who's safe and maybe who isn't and who not to, so they'll be able to turn somebody down. Whereas, yeah, in street cases, you just rocks up and jump in the car.
But can they? Can they always turn someone down? I mean, if you need the money,
Well, if they've
if
got
you've got.
perhaps a bit of protection around you in terms of there's other women that you're working with.
Yes, and I think actually as well that women on the street also do a certain amount of that. So they tip each other. I think there are areas where that you would see a group of women who are obviously, and they would tip each other off if somebody had had a really bad experience with somebody. And I think women do try and look out for each other, obviously, but they haven't got the same resources if you're in a brothel.
Yeah. And no government protection because it's illegal.
Yeah,
And
because
Yeah.
it's illegal.
yeah,
They
Yeah.
can't come out and say. It's just, it like I said, boggles the mind as to why nobody's thought of this to do with the situation that the UK's in at the moment. It would it would pave over so many cracks, pun intended.
Yeah.
indeed.
But it's interesting what you said, Anne, about kind of general representation, because when you do think of how sex workers are represented in programs and stuff like that, they usually look quite glamorous. They are normally, I think, if you see them in a TV drama or something, a bit fleeting. So, like, I can't really talk to you for long, but here's the information that I've got. They're sort of portrayed as vulnerable, but I don't think perhaps we can't, like the choice they made not to put that article out, maybe we can't really stomach how vulnerable they really are. Maybe that's what we're finding uncomfortable, in this particular podcast. So I'm wondering, in your books, how are those characters kind of represented?
The prostitute is in the first book, and there are references to sex workers, etc., and trafficked women in other books. But the first book, Dances in the Wind, is all about sex workers and how. Well, I don't want to give too much away, do I? Anyway,
There's no spoilers.
there are some deaths, but they have been. There's been a news blackout on them because people in the know, as it were, and so it's goes into.
Yeah, I don't want you to give any spoilers away. If you want to know more on that question, listeners, you'll have to go and read the book.
Indeed.
In terms of sort of danger for prostitutes and sex workers, there's they're more chance of being killed by a John, as
Yeah.
we've discovered.
Not anyone called
Not
John,
specific pronoun
but
John,
the John.
but a customer. No. Yeah, a customer, perhaps their employer, let's say, perhaps by and we're kind of ignoring the fact that they're also probably on quite a hard life. They're not going to be eating particularly well. If they are on drugs, they're in danger again from another side. So you've got that, but also, and being a true crime podcast, we can't ignore the fact they are one of the highest groups targeted by serial killers. You've basically got three things that you can be that can make you more likely be targeted by a serial killer. One of them is a prostitute. The second one is a early morning jogger or late night jogger.
Oh no!
Yep.
Yeah. Best knock that on the head then. That's another reason not to get out there and exercise for my own health and well-being.
Yeah. You got the headphones on, you cut off one of your main senses there to sense any danger. It's quiet. And especially even if you have a dog with you, I don't think it makes much of a difference. But then the third one is a little less likely now, are hitchhikers, because you don't get as many hitchhikers as you used to do. But those were the three main ones that if someone went missing, they were probably in one of those three categories.
Oh gosh, I'm gonna start taking a little taser with me when I go jogging. Add that into the kit.
I think one of the things that runs through the whole series is actually the vulnerability of women. And my heroine, who is a freelance journalist, surprise, surprise, she is very vulnerable and gets into situations that are horrible and life-threatening as well. So there is all the way through the books, there is corruption in high places as well as low places, and vulnerability of women in particular.
And did that influence your choice to set it in the 90s in particular?
The reason I set it in the 90s was that's when I did the interview.
Okay, yeah.
And it was so relevant to that time, and also to not having mobile phones, although I did have one then. But it's not having the mobile phones and not having the internet so much, and it works as far as I see it works in that way. And I enjoyed writing about the 90s and not being up to date, with technology and all the rest of it. I think, sorry, and I wrote it, and it went to a few agents. Nobody liked it. I put it away, and it was, I think, 2015. I sort of found it in a drawer and thought, I'll read this afternoon, see what it's like. And I thought, I still think this works, but it does need rewriting.
There's definitely a bit of a nostalgia now around the 90s that people love. I think it's people are interested in things from the 90s. And interestingly, Anne, I looked those stats up without knowing actually that your book was set in the 90s. And those stats are very clearly from the 90s. So based off a government report from around that time. So it was definitely something that was kind of in the public consciousness at that particular time. Yeah, maybe it was, how kind of society has a zeitgeist as well, don't they? I'm sure you might remember. I'm sure there was a time when like single mums were responsible for all wrongdoings in the world. I swear, in the 80s, that was a thing.
In the 90s, I was a single mother, and literally, I think I was responsible for bad weather, the wrong government, and I remember once somebody saying to me something about, what does your husband do, or something like that, and I said, well, I'm not married and I'm a single parent, and this woman just looked at me and said, oh, poor you.
Yeah, there was this period of time, wasn't there? That's ridiculous to think about now, but
I didn't
yeah.
feel poor me. I felt absolutely wonderful that I had a fabulous baby, and I didn't want anybody to sort of pity me, give me money maybe, but
We all want that.
I think people still feel it now as well, because now lots of people choose to be solo parents, but by choice choose to raise children on their own without being in a relationship. And I think there's still some of those things still hung over, and people kind of think, oh, why would you do that? Why would you possibly do that? Or and I think, well, because I want to be a parent, but haven't necessarily found the person to do that with, or I just don't want to do it with someone else. I'm going to do it on my own.
I remember one of my old college lecturers saying the good thing about being a single parent, Anne, is you don't have to make the compromises in parenting.
There is that. Although my husband just does what I tell him.
Oh, well.
We're doing it this way, all right? There is no compromise. Well, there is compromise, but just for him.
Right.
You're a steel rod, Lisa. You really are. Well, all that aside, ladies, we are running out of time for this first episode.
Oh my goodness.
But we have so much to talk to Anne about. And also in the next episode, Anne, we are going to do another true crime off. Me and Lisa are going to present you each with a case of a serial killer that targeted prostitutes.
Ooh.
And you are going to pick the winner.
I am all ears.
We are incredibly competitive. Well, I'm competitive. I can't really say that about Lisa, but I'd just like to point that out.
I'm doing my research right now.
Oh, no, you're not. Well, we are keeping Anne down the rabbit hole for a week. So you've got time to line your sack, ready to catch her a friend.
No, I have to focus on keeping her comfortable. So I've got some hay down there now. We've still got loads of fruit and fibre left over. Some mud coffee. We did install a little bell as well, so you can ring it if you're sort of feeling a bit uncomfortable. No one will come, but you can ring it. It'll give you a sense that you're doing something for yourself. Yeah,
You've got some control. Yeah.
My mood just lifted with the idea of a bell, and now it's plummeted again.
Well, look, you get a lot of you time, Anne. That's what you're going to focus on. So thank you, listeners, for stopping by. We hope that we entertained and informed you in equal parts. And we look to see you again on another episode with Anne Coates. If you can't wait a week, it should be on Patreon, ready for you if you want to join us on Patreon. But also don't forget, wherever you're listening to this podcast, you can subscribe to us and always know when an episode is coming out and get informed by your platform. And it doesn't cost you a bean, not a carrot, not a bean, not a handful of hay. Costs you nothing, and it means the world to us because obviously we are still a new podcast. Follow the Red Rabbit wherever you have your socials. So we're on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. So you will hear. I will get it right one of these times. One day I'll say it, and I won't have to diddle around with it. But you will hear us next time, listeners. Thank you for stopping by.
Bye-bye.
Bye.